Good evening, fantasy football fans. Happy Labor Day. This is Scott Spratt and Michael Moore. We're bringing you another episode of the Fantasy Slant, powered by ProFootballFocus.com Fantasy and brought to you by DraftKings. Michael, it's been a pretty good three-day weekend. I was just complaining to you about all this fantasy football that I have going on. I hope that you aren't sick and tired of it. I'm just ready for the season to kick off, to tell you the truth. How about you?
Yeah, no, I'm at about the same place. I think there's I think between the two of us, we've said just about as much as there is to say. So yeah, it's time for them to start counting now.
Yeah, and I can't believe I told Jeff and Mike that I'm willing to do rankings this year, because I've already been telling you how I've been agonizing over it all day, and it's really not a productive way to spend my time. You know, when I'm really debating on whether or not Jacob Tamme deserves to be a top 30 tight end this week, then I think we've gone off the reservation.
Scotty, if you want to just have me substitute 1 week, I'm available. So
okay, I may just throw in some random baseball players and then see if anybody actually notices, because I feel like no one would. But
why
anyway,
is Mike Trout right? That's okay.
Yeah, he's good. He'd probably be a really good linebacker, frankly.
Probably.
But let's get on to some important topics. And by important, I mean, could be important. Depends on how deep a league you play in. Because today, Michael and I are going to go through what we consider to be the major cuts from the 53-man roster cutdowns that maybe have fantasy impact, either because the player that got cut was relevant, or more likely the player that got cut has some impact on players that are still on the roster, and that's the thing that'll be fantasy relevant. So we're going to start there, and then we're going to see how that goes. And if we get through that quickly, we may hit on some Week 1 storylines. And then Michael and I are probably going to recap our Gold Subscriber League auction that we participated in last Thursday, which is that really cool reality sports online format. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Let's go ahead and get started, though, Michael, with the cuts that matter. And I made a list of all of these, and I came up with more or less 12 of them. I'm just going to go through them in order, not in order of importance, but in order of when I wrote them down, Michael. So I'll just bring them all up one by one, and then you give me your commentary, and I'll tell you how right or wrong you are.
Okay, sounds good.
Number one, the Panthers. I got to start with my own team here. They cut strong safety Robert Lester, which this is sort of a IDP sort of related issue, but that leaves pretty much Roman Harper, the longtime Saints strong safety, as the only real strong safety that they have to play. So how does this affect your opinion of I guess their teams in IDP? Would you draft Harper as even a top 20 or so defensive back this year?
Probably not top 20. Would I use him? Would I stream him maybe a week or two? Probably. I mean, look, on the Panthers, they're in the NFC South, a very pass-heavy division, no matter how you look at it. And look, Roman Harper had a couple hundred tackle seasons. He's capable. So would he be like a DB1 or 2 for me? No. But could I stream him on some bye weeks? Yeah, I think that's the role he would fit for me. Is that right? Because the Panthers are your team, Scott. So yeah, I feel like you would know more than
I think you are right. I guess I could see Harper getting a couple of sacks. He's always been a pretty good run blocker as well, a run stopper as well. So he might have a use, but this isn't really a good sign for me in terms of the Panthers' overall defense and their coverage abilities. They're really going to be relying on Greg Hardy again this year, and if he ends up getting suspended at any point, that could spell trouble, because their only real way to stop wide receivers is with a good pass rush. So
right.
At least have a little bit of trepidation there with the Panthers in the long term, but for the time being, the defensive line is good enough that you can start that team defense with confidence. Okay, Michael, point number 2. The Bengals cut Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. I think we all pretty much saw this coming. They brought in the rookie, Jeremy Hill, who has been impressive so far this preseason. Between he and Giovanni Bernard, I don't think Green Ellis was going to have much of a workload anyway, and he's sort of a duplicate there. So he's cut. How long until he's a New England Patriot, Michael?
Until the first Stephen Ridley fumble, Scott. I think that's. I mean, it's almost like it's just destined to happen. Week 1 or 2, Ridley's gonna fumble, and like Monday morning, the news comes out that Ben Jarvis Green Ellis is citing it. Because look, I remember James White was a hot commodity last couple weeks heading into rookie dynasty drafts, but quite honestly, he hasn't really shown anything special. I mean, he had a golden opportunity to sort of take those reins, and I don't think he did. So, yeah, I think, the second Stephen Ridley fumbles for the first time, I think Belichick will be on the phone.
So, well, I mean, we're being serious. I mean, if you were in a deeper league and then you would roster Green Ellis because maybe you didn't realize that he was on the roster bubble, would you hold him to see if he got picked up in a week or two?
Yeah, I would. If it were a deep league and I already had him, yeah, I definitely would. I'd keep him around. Look, he's still a capable running back. I mean, it's kind of funny to think the Bengals had a surplus at running back, but he's still a competent runner. So even if it's not New England, which is the heavy favorite, I think he'll probably end up somewhere. And depending on the situation, could have some value, at least as a touchdown vulture.
It's possible. I'm not super optimistic, but if you were in a very deep league, I could see holding him. But I don't know. I'm not sure he's gonna find a spot. Honestly, we see this happen a lot. The fact that he's never fumbled is like a really cool little factoid, which I don't even think is true anymore. It was true when he was a Patriot, but I don't know how good of a player he is these days. So, whatever the case, let's move on to the next topic. So the Browns, they released Nate Burleson, who was among their group of wide receivers who we were going to see who could stand out maybe after the Josh Gordon suspension was finalized for the full season. Does that improve the outlook for you for either Miles Austin or Andrew Hawkins, or does it have any impact on their fantasy stock for you?
Yeah, it's a slight uptick, just because I think there's probably less competition there now. I mean, they signed Hawkins in the offseason, Scott, as someone they wanted. I mean, they wanted him to be there. So I was probably higher on Hawkins than most. I mean, I don't think he's going to approach wide receiver 1 or 2 levels, but I think, in a PPR league especially, I think he could have some value. Miles Austin, I think, if you're looking for a number 1 receiver in an offense, he may be the guy, but that's only until one of his hamstrings explodes again. So,
yeah, the pessimism is well founded, but Austin is the player of the two that I'm a little bit more interested in because I feel like Hawkins sort of caps out at a Brandon Gibson type of player, whereas
sure.
Austin, you could potentially see him being an effective wide receiver 2 or 3 for a few weeks until things go haywire. How much does this affect your Jordan Cameron opinion, though? He may be the player that benefits the most from the real lack of receiving options on the team.
Well, yeah, and that was the word, out of the Browns camp was, oh, no, then if Gordon's out, we're making Cameron the focal point. But I don't know, Scott. I mean, what's your opinion? I would be concerned if I'm a Cameron, dynasty owner, that Josh Gordon's not going to be there this year to take some attention away. I feel like a lot of what Cameron did, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's an exceptional tight end, but he also had Josh Gordon, pretty much deflecting a lot of attention away. And without him there, Miles Austin isn't going to scare anyone. So I would be concerned that they're going to come down pretty hard on Cameron as far as opposing defenses go.
It's sort of a catch-22 situation where you're always saying that, okay, does the defensive attention matter more or does the lack of other viable targets matter more? I'm never sure, especially in the case of a wide receiver versus a tight end. It's not like the cornerback's going to be sliding over to take on Cameron. They just don't have the size to cover him in the first place. It just matters about the linebackers. So I'm not so sure about that. But the news for me, it doesn't really move Cameron out of the quagmire of tight ends. He doesn't raise to the level of the Julius Thomases for me where I'm actually thinking about taking them. I'm still in the mode where if I don't get one of the first 3 or so, I'm pretty much waiting to get Zach Ertz or whoever else at the end of a 10 or 12 team league. Okay, cut number 4. Ryan Williams, former Arizona running back who's made his way to the Cowboys, got a little bit of buzz this preseason that may have been injury-related in terms of the other players, but looks like Lance Dunbar and Joseph Randle are going to be okay, so they're still on the team and Williams is out. Sort of handicap these backups right now. I mean, we know that DeMarco Murray's had his injury issues before. Is there anyone to look at here behind him if you own him and you want to maybe grab a handcuff?
If I were to take one, I'd probably take Randall, only because everything I've heard from the Cowboys this offseason is they view him as sort of the passing back option, because you got to remember they have Scott Linehan now as offensive coordinator, who in Detroit last year used 2 back sets a lot. I mean, he fully utilized both Joique Bell and Reggie Bush, and all indications are that Randall's going to be the guy that's going to play that sort of pass-catching role. So for me, if I had to pick one, I'd probably go Dunbar if I'm in a PPR league. In a standard league, it might be a little closer just because, like you said, it's not a guarantee DeMarco's going to make it all year without getting hurt at some point. And look, it's a very attractive offense to be in, no matter what skill position you're at. So So if it's PPR, I'd probably go Randall. If it's standard league, I'm probably 50-50.
Dunbar is really small, so I don't think he would have really any chance of replicating the DeMarco Murray type of workload. But I think it would be sort of a split job, and this isn't really a situation where I'm looking to handcuff a player. But Dunbar maybe have a little bit of value regardless. I guess it'll remain to be seen. All right, number 5, Texans. They traded for Ryan Mallet and cut Case Keenum. So, it's a kind of an uncertain long-term situation there at quarterback. Are you interested in Mallet now that he's not being struck down by Jimmy Garoppolo in New England? Could he maybe take over at some point this year for Ryan Fitzpatrick?
It's like I forgot who had said this, but I saw something on Twitter. One of our colleagues or something that of the 3 quarterbacks in Houston, literally they invested the least amount in Mallet and given up that 6th-round pick, right? So they signed Fitzpatrick. They used, I think, a 4th on Savage.
Yeah.
For me, it doesn't really make a whole lot of waves. I think, if anything, it's a safety valve if Fitzpatrick really takes a nosedive this year, which I personally don't think he will. I think he'll be steady. I'm not saying he's going to be good, but I think he'll be steady. So, I don't see Mallet making an impact this year at all. What about you?
I tend to agree. I think that Mallet would be the one that would step in if something happened to Fitzpatrick. So in that sense,
only for this year though, because he's Mallet's
he's only under contract for this year. I mean, that's why they didn't have to invest very much money in him,
right?
Of course.
And I think it's probably an indication Savage obviously isn't ready. So in the event Fitzpatrick maybe gets hurt or something, they need a better option than throwing Savage out there.
But just because Mallet's only going to be with the team under his current contract for this season doesn't mean that he doesn't have a chance to potentially start for another team next year.
Sure.
A lot of teams they feel like the Patriots have that magic pixie dust, so it's like people are grabbing Brian Hoyer, and not like Hoyer is not a good player necessarily, but I think people assume that because the Patriots selected Mallet when they had Brady that he is a really good player and they may have misevaluated or something. I think there's a chance that he could get a chance, if not this year, then next year. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at him if I'm in a dynasty league that has maybe 30 to 35 quarterbacks rostered, but shallower than that, I'm not really interested.
Yeah, I'm not interested at all. I don't think.
Okay, that's fair. Case Keenum, he's now on the Rams, I think. So anything to look at there? Shaun Hill, not exactly a household name.
I don't know what to make of that, quite honestly. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen Shaun Hill play, period. So that's the big question mark, is how well is Hill gonna be situated. And look, he's got some talent around him. I mean, not a whole lot, but it's not. Okay, fair enough.
The Rams have bottom 5 receivers in the league, right? I mean,
they really do. Oh yeah, no, they do. I don't know what to make of it. I really don't. I mean, Keenum was okay last year. I mean, I think he was hot coming out of the gate. Definitely regressed as the season went on. So, I think just in general that whole situation should probably be avoided.
I agree. Stay away from all the Rams quarterbacks for the time being. Okay, next up, the Dolphins cut Daniel Thomas, and I also made a note that they cut Marcus Thigpen, who's been sort of a kick returner / running back for them. That slots Damien Williams, the sort of hot rookie, in as the 3rd running back. And I think that means that Jarvis Landry, the rookie wide receiver, will be the one returning kicks and punts. Correct me if you think I'm wrong there, Michael. Does that sort of change your opinion about the running back situation? Are you maybe picking up Damien Williams? A lot of people that had rookie drafts earlier in the summer, Williams wasn't selected at all. He wasn't sort of a major prospect at the time, but He's been sort of impressive in the short term. So what do you think of Williams, and what do you think of the Dolphins running backs?
Just due to the fact that it's not settled there yet. I mean, I don't know anyone that has a good read on the pulse of the Dolphins running game right now. So yeah, and if he's the primary backup to Moreno and Miller, yeah, I'd be interested. I'd take him in a late rookie dynasty draft. I really would. For Landry, it's kind of interesting. He seems to be the guy that sort of is lost in the shuffle amongst all the rookie receivers this year, right? As far as dynasty drafts go.
Completely agree.
Yeah, which I don't think I think there could be some good value there. I mean, there's not that many other receiving options in Miami right now. I mean, behind Wallace and Hartline. So, and look, Landry's got some talent. It's not like he's a complete scrub. So, yeah, I would probably buy those two guys right now.
Landry actually outscored Odell Beckham last season in LSU, so it's not like he's a scrub. He just doesn't have the ceiling in many scouts' opinions. But, yeah, I agree. I think that Landry is sort of a forgotten man. I think in another draft he would probably be considered a lot better prospect. It's just that there's so many quality receivers in this year's rookie class that somebody had to get knocked down, so it's sort of him. And I agree. I like Damien Williams. I like him probably more because I don't like the people in front of him. And so for a third running back on the team, that gives me.
I don't think anyone does.
A lot of people really like Lamar Miller, but.
And yet they're saying Moreno's gonna start. That's the funny thing. That's
what the Dolphins are saying, but I feel like fantasy players aren't buying into that, but they probably should be.
Right.
But that's a whole other conversation, I guess. The main point that I'm making is I think Damien Williams is definitely worth rostering in dynasty formats. And there's somebody you can cut coming up. Actually, I'll just jump to him right now. The Redskins, they cut Leigh Sheestrunk, who was a rookie running back that they drafted this season. So if you have him on your team, maybe you should cut him and pick up Damien Williams if he's still available. But for the Redskins perspective, we've talked about this some, but if something happened to Alfred Morris, what would Roy Helu's role be for the team?
I'm one of those that thinks Helu was probably going to get a bump up anyway. Not a huge bump. I don't think it was going to. I mean, okay, so they have Jay Gruden now as head coach, who was the offensive coordinator at Cincinnati last year, and with his two running backs last year, with Green Ellis and Bernard, it was a fairly even split, meaning they both got a good share. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to that this year with Morris and Helu or anyone else, but. I think Helu has always been a pretty good value just because he is the primary backup there. So do I think he's going to be a threat to carries for Morris? No, but I definitely think they're going to pass more, and that's where Helu's going to be probably more involved. With Seastruck, I never got that. I really didn't. I mean, he was drafted late. He literally had more fumbles than catches last year at Baylor. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So. Yeah, I never bought into that. I don't think it changes anything about the Redskins' running attack whatsoever.
So the third running back on their team then is Silas Redd, who's an undrafted rookie out of Penn State by way of USC. I may have that backward in my head, but whichever way. I don't really know a ton about him, but he's 212 pounds, didn't really have a lot of catches in college. Is he someone worth thinking about at all?
I think just on extremely deep rosters, maybe. Especially if you've got maybe Morris and you're a conservative player that wants the injury handcuff. But I don't know. I'm sort of like you had said, we don't know a whole lot about him yet, and I probably wouldn't pull the trigger on a roster spot yet.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, couple more, some minor ones, I guess. But the Patriots cut Josh Boyce, who was their second rookie receiver that they took last season. They also got running back Jonas Gray, which means that Stevan Ridley is still on the team. So hooray for them until BenJarvus Green-Ellis gets signed. I like Shane Vereen and not much else among their running backs this year. The Jets, they released Stephen Hill, who was a bit of a project wide receiver out of Georgia Tech that I think people were hoping to connect the dots from Calvin Johnson to Demaryius Thomas to him. Didn't really happen. Although Stephen Hill is now trying out with the Panthers. If the Panthers signed him tomorrow, would you be interested at all?
No, probably
Okay.
not. I think they're fairly entrenched with what they got with Benjamin and Kotri and Avant. So, yeah, no, I would pass right now.
I don't know if they're entrenched. That's not what I would term the sort of holdover strategy.
For week one, they're entrenched.
Yeah, Hill would be a long-term play that, again, is a very deep dynasty league play only. But at least he's an outside option. The Panthers could definitely use one of those. The Eagles, they released Kenyon Barner, who they had traded for from the Panthers for not much. But he was a former Oregon running back that hasn't really worked out in the league because he's too small. And so I guess if he's not going to be on Chip Kelly's team, he's probably not going to find a roster spot. The Chargers, this is sort of a little surprising to me. They released Vincent Brown, who might have been actually ranked by some fantasy analysts as the presumptive number 2 wide receiver, but this sort of firms it up for Malcolm Floyd. Does Floyd interest you at all? I feel like he's basically free in all leagues, but is starting for a quarterback that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely I would buy Floyd. I really would. He's finally healthy. And look, like you said, that is a good offense. Now, I would have some concern because I don't really know. I don't know where if there's enough balls to go around there, right? I mean, they have a lot of options. They've got obviously Keenan Allen. Gates is still a relevant fantasy player. They've said they want to get the ball more to Ladarius Green, but that remains to be seen. And then they still got Danny Woodhead out of the backfield and now Donald Brown out of the backfield. So, I think I would take him just because he's a second receiver on an offense. He's going to start. But I don't know that I expect a whole lot. What about you?
See, I guess I'm the opposite. I fully expect Floyd to finish as a top 50 receiver this year, but I'm not going to draft him anywhere because unless it's a really, really deep league, then I'm sort of taking shots at players that can become top 30 receivers, and I just don't think Floyd has any chance of that. But, right. I mean, I think he'll probably rattle off 50 catches and, 700 yards pretty easily this year. So
yeah.
I guess if you were in a league where you need to start 7 receivers or so, then absolutely grab him. But the upside is very limited because there's so many other options on the team, as you mentioned.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to rattle through a few kicker notes, but I know this isn't exactly the most exciting topic. But if you drafted already, you may be a little bit in trouble with these. I actually did. I drafted Derek Dimke of the Saints, basically just trying to guess who the Saints kicker was going to be. And then I was like, oh, they cut Shane Graham. I'm totally right. And then I looked a little further down. I'm like, oh, they cut both of their kickers. And so currently I don't think the Saints have a place kicker on their roster. So heads up if you're for that. I guess they'll sign one between now and Sunday, but I don't know who they're going to go with. The Chiefs, they cut Ryan Suckup, and they're going with Cairo Santos. And the Eagles cut Alex Henry, and they're going with Cody Parkey. I literally know nothing about either of these guys, but I actually ranked Cody Parkey pretty highly just because he's on the Eagles and they move quickly. And so, a kicker's a kicker. I want him in a fast-paced offense. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and with Parkey, actually, that is a good play because the main reason they cut Henry, quite honestly, he never made a 50-yard field goal. He did not have a strong leg. And Parkey made 2 from 50 in the preseason. So it made the choice pretty easy for them on who they were going to go with. And yeah, I agree. I mean, combine that with the fact that he's in a very good offense. He could be your starting kicker in a lot of leagues. I really think he could.
Yeah, and if you're interested in maybe you didn't grab a guy because you were just holding someone on your roster or something, that's a good game to pick up. Also, the Eagles are playing Jacksonville week 1. So.
Or if you drafted Henry a couple weeks ago, there's your replacement.
Go grab Parkey before someone else beats you to it. Okay, Michael, I think we probably should spend at least a little bit of time talking about some week 1 storylines or things that you're looking for week 1 that you want to see how it goes down because it might change the way that you view fantasy matchups going the rest of the season. I wrote down a few here. I'm not sure if you have any, but we can go back and forth if you do. I'll start with the first one. The Saints are playing the Falcons this week. This is a big NFC South matchup. And to me, this is interesting for 2 reasons. One, because I feel like the Saints' defense is a very viable sleeper defense. They've added some really nice players. Last year, you had Kenny Vaccaro, the strong safety, and Keenan Lewis really emerge in the secondary, and they added Jarris Byrd, who's one of my favorite free safeties in the league. Plus, Cameron Jordan really came on strong. I feel like they have a pretty strong defensive unit. And I don't know what I'm going to be able to decide necessarily in this game, but I'm curious if they shut down the Falcons, are you going to be thinking that the Falcons are just terrible still, or do you think maybe the Saints could be a viable sleeper defense?
Quite honestly, I've been high on the Saints defense this offseason, and I'm a little surprised more people weren't. I mean, they had a very good defense last year, just statistically speaking, as far as yards allowed and points allowed. And like you said, they have a bunch of playmakers. So, whether you're in a standard scoring format or a high-scoring play format as far as IDP or even team defenses go, I'm high on the Saints. I really am. So, look, if they keep Atlanta to under 14 points or something like that, I think it's more a reflection on the defense rather than the Atlanta offense. Because at the same time, I'm pretty high on the Atlanta offense this year. But I'm probably higher on the Saints defense. I think they're very good. And they have a bunch of people, IDP-wise, that I would want on my team. A ton.
Yeah, I think so. I think they're a very viable sleeper. So if you didn't reach and you were sort of the last guy taking in your second to last round, then the Saints are sort of in that mix with the Buccaneers and the Ravens for me as a defense that I think deserves to be rated a little bit more highly than mid to late teens.
Completely. Well, and let's face it, like we alluded to earlier, you've got the Panthers who, admittedly, I mean, you know this, have a lot of question marks. So, I think for me, it's sort of like, the Saints are knocking at the door of being a top 5 team defense for me.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, but if you're looking for a defense to sort of come out of nowhere the way the Panthers defense did last year, then the Saints are definitely on the short list. Okay, do you have one that you want to go with, or should I just keep going?
Well, I think for me, the one that continues to be just all the way around is just the Browns offense in general, and I think how quickly they're going to turn it over to not just Manziel, but the running game and the pass. I mean, they have a lot of good young guys that they're not necessarily starting yet, but I think they're going to. And the big thing look, the Browns have a brutal schedule early on, right? I mean, they play the Steelers, they play the Ravens, so it's sort of a matter of time on when they're going to finally turn it over to Manziel, and I'm honestly very curious to see how that offense is going to react to him over a guy like Hoyer. I mean, I think Hoyer's okay, but I definitely think there's a lot of things Manziel can do that Hoyer just can't, and I think that could be very beneficial to a lot of guys. I mean, Cameron, Austin, whoever. So for me, it's sort of like, I guess the question is, how bad are the Browns going to be out of the gate, and is it going to warrant bringing in Manziel that early?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I feel like all three of the major rookie quarterbacks, and I say that ignoring Derek Carr, who I think is starting week 1, but whatever the case.
He is.
the three primary fantasy options among the dynasty quarterbacks that are rookies, I feel like they're all just pretty much waiting for their teams to either fall out of the race or be mediocre enough by their bye weeks to go in. I mean, I don't know if there's any urgency other than that to get them started, though, because I'm not sure any of their teams are any good. Do you think there's a scenario where one of those quarterbacks is starting more quickly than that? Like, imagine a scenario where, I don't know, the Vikings, they're actually 500. Would they be looking at Teddy Bridgewater potentially while they're still sort of in the mix with Matt Castle?
And I was just thinking that. I think, honestly, I think Bortles has probably passed Bridgewater for sooner to start. Because, look, all offseason the Jaguars have said, hey, we're benching Bortles the whole season. He's going to carry a clipboard, and he's going to learn from, the great Chad Henne, and he's not going to see the field. Well, he had a pretty good offseason. He had a pretty good
preseason.
Preseason, yeah. So I think that made them reconsider what they're going to do with him. And Bridgewater also actually had a very good preseason, but at the same time, yeah, sort of like you alluded to, I think Minnesota has a chance to be good. I'm not going to go all the way out on the limb yet, but look, I think they've got a chance. They have good talent around Castle, and it's going to hinge on the defense. But hey, they've got Mike Zimmer there. So personally, I think if we're ranking the sooner starting rookies, it would be Manziel, Bortles, and Bridgewater for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to me, I've been most interested in Manziel's fantasy potential the whole time because of his sort of rushing ability. But in terms of impressiveness of preseason, you have Bortles and Bridgewater at the top, and then Manziel somewhere way, way, way far behind.
Right.
Not that that's something I'm necessarily going to hold against him, but I don't know. Maybe the other guys have potential more than I'm giving them credit for. Quarterback just seems really deep right now, though, so it's hard to have the urgency with those guys.
Right. Well, I think it's kind of interesting. Like Jacksonville, it's not like they have the mindset that they're going to suck this year, but I think they kind of did. I mean, they essentially said that when they said, hey, we're starting Chad Henne, and that's it, right? Because I think we can agree that if they were really interested in winning now, there was a ton of players they probably could have drafted at 3 that would have made a more immediate impact, but they didn't. So they essentially, I don't want to say they punted this season, but it came pretty close, right? With Minnesota, you've got a team that does, have some expectation, some level of expectation to win now. And let's face it, they're in the NFC North, which is a very winnable division. With Cleveland, it's sort of like they're in the middle of that, meaning like they don't, I think, really expect to be like, challenging for the division crown, but they also don't like expect to completely suck, quite on the level of the Jaguars. So they're in sort of like NFL purgatory for me, where they don't really know what they're what they're gonna do or what they want to do, and to me that just makes it a lot easier for them to pull the trigger on Manziel, because I think their mindset is, look, we drafted him, we don't really have a plan, we might as well go for it.
Sidebar: the AFC South is way more winnable than the NFC North, but it doesn't really matter. All three of these rookies are going to be starting by week 8, so we'll just go with that.
Proving all of us wrong, and they're probably all going to make the playoffs and the Pro Bowl.
All right, my next thing that I'm looking for in week 1 is the workload of some of these key rookies, and by key rookies I just mean the guys that I think are going to get worked into the mix a little bit faster than some of the other guys and the quarterbacks like we've been talking about. So guys like Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Matthews among the receivers, Bishop Sankey, linebackers Ryan Shazier and C.J. Mosley. Are they going to be getting 3-down work immediately? I'm really interested in seeing their workloads and seeing how quickly they maybe become fantasy relevant. For years I've been writing off most rookies, but I feel like that's sort of been a changing trend, and it wouldn't really stun me if someone like Kelvin Benjamin, for instance, all of a sudden was on pace for 60 to 70 catches. So I mean, maybe these guys can actually be usable in fantasy. Cooks is going to have potentially major impact too on Marcus Colston's value. So I'm really curious about week 1 how that's going to all unfold.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just I think NFL teams in general are less willing to wait for their players to develop. I mean, look, it's a win now league, just like a lot of other leagues. So you have to draft with the mindset of, hey, this is a project, but also we need to win now. And for all the guys you mentioned, I think those, for the most part, were win now moves. I mean, definitely Cooks, that's a win now move. Benjamin is kind of win now just because they needed something, but I think he probably exceeded expectations as far as how ready he was to contribute. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, we'll have to wait and see when the actual games start, but I'm a little surprised that it's so apparent that he's the number 1 receiver on the team now that it's not even a question mark. I know that physically that shouldn't be a surprise, but I do get what you're going with there, yes.
Yeah. And with the linebackers, I mean, look, you had Kiko Alonso last year get like 150 tackles out of the gate. I mean, on defense, there is no waiting around anymore. I mean, if they draft a guy, especially in the middle, like they did, like Pittsburgh did with Shazier and Baltimore did with Mosley, you could expect, I think, 100 tackles out of the gate. And with Shazier, look, he's the first rookie to start on defense for Pittsburgh in like eons. So to me, that shows a lot. I think especially with those two guys, and given it's not a regular thing, I don't think you're going to have 5 rookie linebackers every year get 100 tackles. But, I think there's definitely something to be said for those linebackers drafted in the first, because there's a good chance they're going to be thrown into it right away.
Maybe, but then again, Arthur Brown, I mean, the Ravens drafted him in the first last year, and
I knew you were going there, Scott. I knew you were going there.
He's presumed to be behind C.J. Mosley right now, so I don't know. I think he still has value in the long term, but...
Well, it does, and that's why, stuff like preseason still counts. I mean, I do remember the Arthur Brown hype last year heading into preseason, and yeah, that was the expectation was, hey, he's going to start, he's the next Ray Lewis, and it's going to be great. But, he got sidelined with an injury. They signed Darryl Smith as sort of an insurance policy, and look, he just never overtook Darryl Smith, quite honestly, and we all knew that heading into week 1. With guys like Mosley and Shazier, I mean, the reports are glowing out of these guys. So, I think again that preseason still matters for a lot of this stuff. So,
okay, last one for me. I'm really speaking. We've been talking about the Ravens defensively, but on the offensive side, I feel like there's a lot up in the air here, Michael. I don't know if you agree, but bringing in Steve Smith, obviously past his prime, but still potentially an effective receiver, he's going to have a lot less pressure on him now, a lot less defensive attention, that could really change things for him. You get Dennis Pitta back after missing most of last year. You've got Marlon Brown, who I love, entering his second season. What do you think is going to happen here? I mean, to me, I'm waiting to see, because I feel like Torrey Smith could be a top 15 receiver or outside of the top 40 with all of the moving parts here in Baltimore.
Right. Well, they brought in Kubiak, who, if you looked at past Kubiak offenses, you had a primary receiver in Houston with Andre Johnson, who I think we would agree Torrey Smith is that role. And look, they utilized the tight end a lot, and Owen Daniels. And I think Dennis Pitta is probably a better player than Owen Daniels. So I think there's potential to even exceed that. For me, outside of that is just dicey, man. Those two guys are the only guys I'm banking on to be a contributor this year. I don't know what to think of guys like Smith and Brown. I think, look, in a vacuum, I think Brown's very good. And if he were on, another team that maybe utilized more three-wide sets, I think he could be pretty valuable. But on this team, look, Kubiak, he's all about the run, man. And if that doesn't go and they can't make that work, I think people should be nervous, quite honestly.
Well, they should probably be nervous then, because that offensive line is still terrible.
Well, yeah, and let's face it, they've got two running backs who, name aside, were awful last year. They were not good. I mean, they really weren't. So, yeah, I think, Kubiak, his offenses go through the run, and if the run doesn't work, I mean, it's on to plan B. And like you said, there's a good chance it doesn't work. So, yeah, now for Smith and Pitta, I think, they're starters for me, so I'm comfortable with them. But, yeah, I see your point exactly. Smith could be, a top 12 receiver, but he could also be outside the top 30, top 40. So.
All right, final thing of the week, Michael. We just had our Gold Subscriber League Year 2 auction draft. This is a bit newer for you because you were taking over for Pat Thorman, who was doing it last year, but it doesn't have time to do it this year. So it works out really nicely because now you get to join the league, and once again, we get to talk about it on the podcast. Brian Fontaine and I talked about it a little bit last year. And there were a couple of interesting things, but I think let's start by getting just your impressions of the league. Again, this is the Reality Sports Online platform, which is really cool in that you basically play like a real GM. So you sign players to contracts, and they can be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and that affects how much money you have to pay them to get them to agree to that contract. There are elements like franchising players. There's guaranteed money involved. It's pretty cool, but wanted to get your first impressions, Michael. How did you think the auction went for you? How do you like the setup?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and I think you and I both had articles on it. It's about, as like you said, as close as you can get to being a real general manager. Because for me, and I've mentioned this before, I would spend hours playing Madden on my PlayStation, but I would literally never play the game. I just played franchise mode the whole time, which this is that. I mean, like you said, you sign players, you draft players, you cut players, you trade players. I mean, it's got all the elements that I think a lot of people like about fantasy football, quite honestly. So, yeah, to enter it, it was great. And to take over an existing team, I think, was interesting too. I've never done that in a dynasty league or otherwise. So to be able to step in with something, which it wouldn't have mattered, if the team completely sucked. I would have done it anyway. But I was pretty thankful that the team I inherited had a pretty solid foundation. So no, I love it. I could very easily see it becoming my favorite genre of all of them.
So let's talk about your specific strategy and your preparation. You're inheriting a team, but you had quite a few players. I guess you were sort of ready to go almost. You had a lot of starting lineups, positions filled. What did you feel like you needed, and how did that affect your strategy going into the auction?
Sure, yeah. So briefly, I think I can cover this briefly. So you start, it's a one quarterback league, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and I think 2 flex positions, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
So the team I inherited already under contract for this year had Kaepernick, Morris, Ellington. I did franchise Jordy Nelson because I think Nelson is just a top 10 receiver anyway, and I didn't want to let him go, which, for the record, just so people know, you can't necessarily re-sign your own players. Like, once their contract's up, it's up. It goes back in the pool. So that was pretty important. I believe Macklin and Patterson were my other receivers. But tight end, I think I had Zach Sudfeld. That's still under contract.
Yes.
So that was definitely my priority heading into both the draft and the auction part.
Yeah, the joys of having a rookie draft that then signs your rookies for multiple years are you had Zach Sudfeld, I had Mike
Right.
Gillislee, and Derrick Rogers, who had already cut previously. But regardless, the tight end became really the story of this auction because, one, Brian Fontaine, the predecessor on the podcast, he's still around in the league, and he cut, well, the contract expired on Jimmy Graham, and he had a tough choice to make between either franchising him or franchising Peyton Manning. So two pretty strong one-year buys for Brian last year, and he totally reasonably ended up franchising Peyton Manning, which re-released Jimmy Graham into the pool, and all hell broke loose. I don't know how else to describe it. It was crazy. He went to the player with the most money left in the auction. I'm trying to figure out where he is on this sheet, but he signed for something like. Go ahead.
Well, and just so people know, the cap that is set in this particular league, I think, is $133 million, right?
Yeah, per year. Yes.
So, yeah, per year. So, and people, I think, had salary cap space from a range of like maybe $30 million to like I think Fontaine had like $70 million or something like that.
Yeah, and obviously because of the nature of the contracts, because of the rookie draft where you have limited rookie salaries that guys are making, inflation is a really big deal in this league, and that had a lot to do with it. But Graham ended up getting signed for $180.5 million over 4 years, which essentially means that Graham is going to be 1/3 of this guy's salary cap for the next 3 seasons. I mean, that seems really crazy to me. I think last year there were a couple of guys that broke the $100 million threshold on 4-year contracts, guys like Des Bryant and A.J. Green, Calvin Johnson, those type of steady, youngish receivers that are established. Even that I thought was quite a lot of money. Yeah, I mean, my number one strategy in this league seems to be trying to avoid locking up my money long term. But, I mean, that was a crazy amount of money to spend on Graham. On one hand, I understand it, Michael, because there were very few impact players left in the draft. But just because Graham is the one player that can really help you out this year, does that seem like it's just too much to commit to a player for a 4-year contract?
Well, I think it's always risky to commit that much money to one player, quite honestly, no matter who it is. I mean, not that people bank on injuries, but injuries happen. And, you know, God forbid Jimmy Graham goes down for a season. That's a 30-year cap space tied up in one player. And for me, yeah, the opportunity cost was just too great. I would much rather have, you know, the $40 million spread around than, you know, amongst a couple guys rather than one. I mean, for example, I think there were 2 other tight ends, I think, that were pretty decent value still available, and that was Dennis Pitta and Greg Olsen. Yeah. And we had our rookie draft before the auction, and I was lucky enough to get Eric Ebron, who I was thrilled to get, but at the same time, I don't necessarily view him as a day one starter, so I still felt like I needed an upgrade. And, you know, I think Olsen went pretty cheap. I think it was like 2 years and $6 million for him, which, look, that's a great value. I ended up getting Pitta. Oh, and another thing people should know, you have a limited amount of these multi-year contracts. So
yes,
I think every year you get 1 4-year, 2 3 years, and 3 2 years. So you can't just like hand out 4-year deals left and right, right? So I decided to use my 4-year deal on Dennis Pitta, who I think I ended up spending about $30 or $33 million over 4 years. Which, look, with an average value of about $7 to $8 million, I'm completely fine with it. Especially considering how high I personally am on Pitta. I think he's going to be a top 10 tight end at least for a couple years. So, yeah, compared to Graham, I think Pitta was a steal.
The timing was really crucial in this draft, and I entered the draft with quite a bit of money. I had to blow up my team early last year, and so traded away some players for draft picks. Really freed a lot of cap room for me. So I needed a tight end as well as a bunch of running backs. I was pretty set at receiver. And having some suspicion that Graham might end up being a ridiculous bid war, I threw out Greg Olsen early. I think I threw him out as the 2nd overall pick and was like, I should just go ahead and grab Olsen now before the real bidding starts. Everybody's going to be holding their money trying to get a piece of Graham. And then for some reason I didn't actually buy him. So big ups to the War Penguin for getting Greg Olsen for $6 million over 2 years. Total steal.
Yeah, that's a great deal. That's a great deal.
it ended up costing me severely because basically I was totally unwilling to pay money for basically any of the tight ends remaining, and I just let them go and let them go and let them go. And so I end up with basically below replacement level at tight end, essentially. I have Michael Rivera of Oakland and Jacob Tamme of Denver, two players that probably aren't in the top 25, I would say, for most people's
talk to me. I have tight end, Scott. Talk to me.
But I think this is sort of the point that I'm trying to illustrate. Well, there are 2 points. One, sometimes the best values in a draft like this are the first few picks because people are trying to keep their options open. If they have maybe one of the marquee players they have their eyes on, they don't want to spend any money on some of the lower tier guys. I think it was a very clever move on my part to start the auction early with a mid-tier option here, and it was just a bad job by me by not following through and actually committing the money to them. But what else I think this is saying is that just because tight end is sort of the position that I needed in my roster, that doesn't make it worthwhile to end up wasting a ton of money on these other tight end options. What I instead ended up doing was building a lot of depth at running back and receiver, and I think that's going to serve me better because it's going to keep me flexible, and I'm going to be able to make trades for players to fit my needs. Mm-hmm. I mean, my major game plan for the time being is I'm just going to be trying to basically uncover whoever this year's Charles Clay is, find some guy that's not being drafted and turn him into a top 15 tight end and tide me over. But if I can't make that happen, I was able to buy Marshawn Lynch. I was able to buy Rashad Jennings. I got Riley Cooper for 1 year and $5 million.
Yeah.
I have a lot of depth at wide receiver and running back, and I feel like I can plug holes with that depth there. What do you think about that sort of as overall advice, Michael?
Yeah, no, I think you're right because I know for me, especially with Olsen, I didn't want to necessarily get into a bidding war that early, but yeah, like I was surprised that no one else sort of jumped in, But yeah, I think, well, it also goes back to sort of how much money you have and sort of what holes you have, right? So, I sort of had the opposite mentality going in, meaning, my roster was fairly set. And likewise, I didn't have that much money to play with. I had about, I think, $30 million to spend, which, given it's about, a quarter or maybe 1/5 of your salary cap space. But look, in an auction draft like this, where you've got Jimmy Graham going for $40 a year, and I don't know, what did you end up getting Lynch at? Because Lynch was the second most valuable free agent in this auction draft.
Yeah, I got Lynch for 2 years and $60 million.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I couldn't compete with the big boys on those kinds of deals. So I sort of had to be selective on where to spend my money, quite honestly, because I didn't have that much to play with. So, getting guys like Pitta, and look, I was very happy to get the depth I got at running back, sort of in the later rounds with Bradshaw and McCluster. I'm pretty high on Bradshaw. I think there's a good chance he's the starter by the end of the year in Indianapolis. And with McCluster, with this being a PPR league, I could see McCluster having some value down the road. So, yeah, I think depending on your cap situation, just like a real NFL team, that sort of dictates your strategy going into that.
Yeah, and we really saw sort of the fallout of all of this come later in the draft when basically, since there were so many discounts at running back earlier in the draft, in my mind, that led to a lot of inflated prices for less important and valuable running backs down the line. So you were talking about getting Bradshaw for $3 million for a year. Trent Richardson went for $35 million over 4 years.
Right.
I think people are, in this sort of format, they're really desperate to spend their 3 and 4 year contracts on young players with that kind of upside. But I'm not necessarily calling Richardson a bad buy because I could see it working out potentially. But
can I call him a bad buy, Scott?
You can. What I ended up doing was basically not spending any multi-year contracts. I think I maybe had a couple of 2 years. I don't think I used a 3-year or a 4-year contract. And granted, I have a lot of rookies and second-year players that are on multi-year contracts right now, but I opted to have the roster flexibility going forward rather than spending a lot of money. I got into some bidding wars for like Marlon Brown and Dwayne Allen, trying to inexpensively fill some of those positions with guys that I think have upside and long-term stability, and I didn't keep them up because I didn't want to keep bidding on those guys, and I don't think they're that kind of difference maker. So I'm really going to have a lot more flexibility than most teams in 2 and 3 years from now, and I think I'm pretty happy about that.
Sure, and the team I inherited from Pat, I think sort of had the same mentality. I mean, he used a multi-year deal on Ruben Randall, for example, for $4 million a year. So, even if Randall doesn't work out, it doesn't necessarily handicap you going forward like a Graham deal, potentially might in year 4 or something else like that. So, yeah, I could definitely see that. And look, for the players that I did inherit that had big salaries, the bright side is, it's not for many years. I mean, Ray Rice, has a pretty big cap number. I think it's like 20 or 26 million. But after this year, he's a free agent, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So, I'm completely with you. I would much rather use those long-term contracts on sort of the middle-tier guys, even lower-tier guys, just to make sure I don't get hit down the road than, blow my entire wad on a Jimmy Graham.
Sure. Now, I don't know if you have the auction board up and handy, but I was curious whether you have an opinion on who maybe your favorite buy was in the auction. Granted that not all these buys came at the same time, so not everyone wasn't facing sort of the same value proposition at the time, but is there a guy that stands out as you're like, wow, that guy got a really good price for that player?
For me or for anyone?
You can
I love the people I bought.
You can pick yourself, or you can pick anyone else, or you can pick yourself once and then someone else the second time.
All right, let's do that. For me, you know what? I was really pleased to get Jay Cutler on the deal I did. I think it was 2 years and $6 million, which, look, I think Cutler's very underrated personally. And look, I'm not saying he's in that elite level with the Brees and the Mannings of the world, but with my current quarterback, Colin Kaepernick, who, likewise is signed to a pretty reasonable deal as far as quarterbacks go. One of the other offseason things that I failed to mention that I'm looking at is, A, is the 49er offense going to be as shaky as they were in the preseason, and B, are they going to change up sort of how they roll, quite honestly? And they've got Stevie Johnson there. Frank Gore looks bad, quite honestly, or he did towards the end of last year. So, heading into this auction with Kaepernick, while still a good value, to be honest, I still have my doubts if he's going to sort of lead me to the promised land. So, a quarterback was quite honestly one of the things I was looking at to upgrade, at least backup-wise. And, yeah, to get a guy like Cutler who, look, it's entirely possible he ends up being my starter at the end of the season over Kaepernick based on how this season goes. So, to get him for that kind of number, I think I was very, very pleased with, quite honestly. And then, we sort of touched on the other deal that I thought was good. The Olsen deal, I mean, it's one of those where I don't know that I realized it happened when it happened, but then when I was looking at the auction results the next day, I was looking at my deal for Pitta for like 4 and 33, and then I'm looking at Olsen at like 2 for 6, and I'm like, crap, like I would have done that, but I mean, so those would have been my 2 value deals, I think. What about you?
There are a couple that I like. Again, a lot of the early picks I think ended up being tremendous values. The Olsen one was great. The Nick Foles for 2 years and $3.5 million was a total steal. Yeah. And I think basically we ended up being in an auction room where everyone was just like, I don't believe in Nick Foles, and so I'm not going to pay for him. But that's kind of a crazy price for somebody that has the potential to be as good as he was last year. What I've noticed over the last couple of years is that quarterbacks just tend to go for less money in this format, which I don't fully understand considering like the crazy run we all had on tight ends. It's not like there's more or fewer quarterbacks starting than tight ends are starting, but like, yeah, you got Cutler for 6 over 2. I got Phillip Rivers for 1 year and 3. I've ended up rostering 3 quarterbacks the last 2 years just because I'm like, these prices are great. I want this trading depth because I have Drew Brees on a multi-year contract as well for what I consider to be an inexpensive amount of money. Beyond that, I think that I just lost it here, but Julian Edelman, here he is. Yeah, 2 years for $9 million. Yeah. To Miggs, really strong buy there. And I really like a lot of these 1 year wide receiver deals that I don't know how people get away with, but I ended up getting a lot of those last year. But Marcus Colston, for instance, 1 year, $9.5 million. There's just no downside there. I got Riley Cooper for 1 for 5. If it doesn't work out, then he's gone. It's no big deal. If you're out of the race, that's a really easy asset to trade to pick up a draft pick. I'm a big fan of those type of contracts. Is there a deal that you think really stands out as the worst deal that you saw? Or are we going to pile on the Jimmy Graham contract?
Well, I don't think you can pile on it too much because it's still Jimmy Graham. I mean, it's still, he's still the best at what he does. The Richardson thing was just nuts to me, quite honestly. I don't get that whatsoever. I mean, for multiple reasons. I think handing out that kind of deal to any running back, I think, is a dicey proposition, one. And two, especially to a guy that, quite honestly, hasn't proven it yet. And it's very possible he doesn't start at the end of the year. So that one I think blew my mind more than any of the other ones, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's a lot of money to spend on a multi-year deal, so I'm not a huge fan of that. The Golden Tate 3-year, $40 million deal.
Yeah, that was the other thing. And quite honestly, I still don't have a lot of depth at receiver behind my starter, so that was one of the positions I was quite honestly looking at as sort of those mid-tier receivers like Tate, Emmanuel Sanders, guys like that. But yeah, when the Tate bidding, I think reached like $20 million, I was out completely.
Yeah, again, I think timing played a big role there, but I mean, it doesn't really make a lot of sense when you have a $40 million deal for Tate. There was a $50 million deal for Eric Decker.
Right.
There was a $47 million 4-year deal for Kendall Wright. Again, I think this is people trying to buy in the younger players for multi-years, but really they're actually making their propositions way riskier because they can't get out of those deals.
Right.
And you sort of stack that up against like an Emmanuel Sanders for 3 years and $18 million, or a Mike Wallace 3 years for $20.5. I mean, obviously those latter contracts are just way more favorable. So the timing was really critical for those wide receiver buys in my mind.
Yeah, and look, and I had an article a couple months ago looking at the positions that are the most consistent, and receiver amongst the top offensive ones by far was the least consistent as far as top performers go. So,
sure.
Yeah, to be spending that kind of money on long-term deals like that, I mean, 3- and 4-year deals just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, especially for mid-tier guys like that. I mean, those guys are not wide receiver ones. None of those guys you mentioned are wide receiver ones, and I don't think they're ever going to be. But to spend that kind of money on that, yeah, it seems a little nutty. But hey, I'm very happy for them to do that, Scott. So hopefully they aren't listening.
Well, I'm sure they are, and they can talk smack to us as well. But
right.
I think, Michael, you and I will probably be bringing this back up from time to time throughout the season because it's fun and it's cool to have a league that we're both a part of and that has really interesting sort of rules and setups. So we'll come back to it. But I think that pretty much wraps up the show for this Labor Day. Michael, do you have any final points, or are you just ready to kick off the season this Thursday?
I'm ready, and I hope people appreciate the time and effort that we're on holiday, Scott. We literally took our holiday to do this for the fans, so enjoy.
That's right. We love you guys. And, thank you guys for loving us back because, we keep getting emails from Jeff Ratcliffe being astounded by how many people are listening to our podcasts, and obviously I'm astounded. I remember back when I started recording these with Chad Parsons, Now a Football Guys, a few years ago. We were getting like 400 listeners an episode. So I thought that was a ton of people at the time, and now that it's many, many more, thank you all for listening. I hope that we're doing a good job and giving you a podcast that you enjoy. But I think that wraps it up, Michael. So for Michael Moore, this is Scott Spratt with the Fantasy Slant for September the 1st. Enjoy the first week, everybody. We'll be back again. We're going to be doing this during the regular season every Monday. And check out that and check out every other of our Fantasy Slant podcasts from Pro Football Focus. Thanks again, and see you next week.